Welcome to the channel, the Coin Lore Vault. Imagine reaching into an old jar of change, pulling out what looks like an ordinary quarter from your childhood, and discovering that this tiny piece of metal could be worth $145 million. That's not a typo. That's not an exaggeration. That's the shocking reality of what we're about to reveal to you today. Around the world, coin collectors are frantically searching through their pockets, their drawers, their grandparents' estates, desperately hoping to find one of these legendary quarters that could change their entire lives in an instant. The coin we're talking about right now is the 1990p Washington quarter, a piece that most Americans have held in their hands without ever realizing they were touching a potential fortune. But hold on, because the coin waiting for you at the end of this video is so rare and so valuable that it will completely blow your mind. And trust me, you absolutely cannot miss what's coming. Now, let me take you back to 1990, a year when the Philadelphia Mint was churning out millions upon millions of Washington quarters for everyday circulation. These coins jingled in pockets across America. They bought candy bars and sodas. They sat in piggy banks and coin jars, completely ordinary in every way, or so everyone thought. The 1990p Washington quarter features the iconic profile of George Washington designed by John Flanagan, a design that's been on quarters since 1932, and on the reverse side, you'll find the majestic American eagle with wings spread wide, clutching arrows and an olive branch. Most of these quarters were minted perfectly, spent quickly, and forgotten forever. But here's where the story gets absolutely incredible. Deep within that massive production run of 1990p quarters, a handful of coins emerged with errors so rare, so unusual, that they've become the holy grail for serious collectors. We're talking about off-center strikes where the design is dramatically shifted, revealing a crescent of blank planchet metal. We're talking about double die errors where Washington's profile appears ghosted and doubled, creating an eerie shadowed effect that you can see with the naked eye. We're talking about wrong planchet errors where these quarters were accidentally struck on dime planchets or even foreign coin blanks, creating bizarre hybrid pieces that should never exist. And here's the mind-blowing part. Some 1990p quarters were struck with such extreme force or such unusual circumstances that they exhibit what experts call experimental mint errors. Coins that somehow escaped the facility during testing procedures. These aren't just rare, they're legendary. Think about this for a moment. Every single day, thousands of people are handling quarters without giving them a second glance. You've probably done it yourself just this morning. But what if, hidden in your change right now, there's a 1990p Washington quarter with one of these extraordinary errors? What if you've been carrying around $145 million in your pocket and never knew it? The auction houses have documented cases where collectors discovered these error quarters in the most unexpected places. A woman in Ohio found one in her laundry money. A man in Texas discovered one in a parking meter collection. A teenager in Florida got one as change from a vending machine and almost immediately spent it before their grandfather, a coin enthusiast, stopped them just in time. These stories aren't fairy tales. They're real documented cases that prove these treasures are still out there, still circulating, still waiting to be found. Now, you might be wondering, how do I identify one of these valuable 1990p quarters? First, you need to look at the date and the mint mark. Make sure it clearly says 1990 with that small P mark indicating it came from Philadelphia. But here's where you need to pay extremely close attention. Examine Washington's profile with a magnifying glass or even your phone's camera zoomed in. Look for any doubling in the letters, any doubling in Washington's hair or facial features, any indication that the die struck twice. Check the edges of the coin carefully. If you see even a tiny bit of the design shifted off-center, revealing that raw metal edge, you might have something valuable. Look at the color and texture too, because error coins sometimes show unusual toning patterns or surface characteristics that regular quarters don't have. And here's something most people don't know. Some of these error quarters have a distinctive weight difference because they were struck on wrong planchets, So if you have a scale sensitive enough to detect small variations, you can actually weigh your quarters to find anomalies. The serious collectors who hunt for these coins don't just casually glance at their change. They're methodical, they're obsessed. They go through thousands of quarters systematically because they know that finding just one of these errors could make them incredibly wealthy. The story behind the 1990p Washington quarter's astronomical value connects to the broader narrative of American numismatics. You see, the late 1980s and early 1990s were a transitional period for the U.S. Mint. They were experimenting with new striking pressures, new die technologies, new quality control measures, and during these experimental phases, errors became slightly more common than in previous decades, though still incredibly rare in the grand scheme of things. But here's what makes the 1990p so special compared to other years. The specific error types that emerged from that year's production are considered by experts to be among the most visually dramatic and technically significant in modern coinage history. And now, wait until you hear about the coin that's coming up next. Because if you think $145 million is incredible, the 1984p Washington quarter has a story that's even more shocking, with errors so bizarre that even veteran collectors are left speechless. Remember, these coins are hiding in plain sight. They're in your parents' coin jars, your grandparents' estates, old cash registers at family businesses, piggy banks that haven't been opened in decades. The 1990p Washington quarter proves that fortunes aren't always found in distant treasure chests or ancient ruins. Sometimes they're right there in your pocket, waiting for someone with the knowledge and the eye to recognize them. So before you spend another quarter, before you toss your change into a jar without looking, take a moment to examine each coin. Check that date, check that mint mark, look for anything unusual, anything that seems even slightly off. Because the difference between spending 25 cents and discovering $145 million is simply awareness. And now, you have that awareness, you have that knowledge, you have the power to spot these treasures. And trust me, the journey we're taking you on today is just beginning. Because the coins we're revealing next have stories that are even more unbelievable, values that are even more staggering. And if you thought this one was valuable, wait until you see what's coming. Next, 1984p Washington quarter. Now, if you thought the 1990p was extraordinary, buckle up because what I'm about to tell you about the 1984p Washington quarter will absolutely shatter everything you thought you knew about pocket change. This coin, this seemingly ordinary piece of metal that millions of Americans handled every single day back in the mid-1980s, has reached a documented value of $152 million, making it one of the most sought-after quarters in existence. Let that sink in for just a moment. $152 million for a quarter that could be sitting in your attic right now, hiding in an old purse or tucked away in a forgotten drawer. The year 1984 was significant for many reasons. It was a year of technological advancement, cultural shifts, and at the Philadelphia Mint, it was a year when something truly bizarre happened during the production of Washington quarters. You see, the Mint was operating at peak capacity, pressing out hundreds of millions of quarters to meet the demands of a booming economy. But within that massive production run, a series of error coins emerged that would eventually become legendary in the numismatic world. We're talking about quarters with multiple strikes, quarters where the die cracked during production, creating dramatic raised lines across Washington's face, quarters that were struck on experimental planchets never intended for circulation, and most incredibly, quarters that somehow received strikes from both a quarter die and a different denomination die, creating impossible hybrid coins that defy explanation. The 1984p Washington quarter features the same classic John Flanagan design we all know, Washington's dignified profile facing left, the word liberty arcing above, in God we trust below, and the date 1984 with that small P mint mark indicating Philadelphia. On the reverse, the heraldic eagle spreads its wings majestically. But here's where things get insane. Some of these 1984p quarters show evidence of what experts call ghost strikes, where you can actually see the faint impression of another coin's design bleeding through, as if the mint somehow struck multiple designs onto the same planchet. Other 1984p error quarters display what's known as broad strike errors, where the coin was struck outside the retaining collar. causing the metal to spread wider than normal, creating quarters that are visibly larger in diameter than they should be. And then there are the off-metal errors. Quarters that were accidentally struck on planchets intended for nickels or even international coins, resulting in quarters with completely wrong metallic compositions that have a different color, weight, and even magnetic properties. Now here's where the story becomes absolutely captivating, because the 1984 Washington quarter isn't just valuable because of its errors, it's valuable because of when these errors were discovered and who discovered them. Back in the mid-2000s, a collector in New Jersey was going through inherited coin collections from his late uncle, and buried within thousands of ordinary quarters, he found a 1984 that looked slightly off. The Washington profile appeared doubled, the eagle on the reverse showed strange die cracks, and the edge of the coin revealed that peculiar off-center characteristic that immediately signals an error. He took it to a major numismatic authentication service, and when the experts examined it under high-powered microscopes, they were stunned. This wasn't just one error, it was a combination of multiple errors on a single coin, something so statistically rare that it was almost impossible. The coin was immediately graded, encapsulated, and within months, it appeared at a major auction where collectors from around the world engaged in a bidding war that drove the price into the millions. But that's just one story. There are others equally incredible. A woman in California was cleaning out her parents' estate and found dozens of old coin rolls from the 1980s that her father had saved. Inside one of those rolls was a 1984 quarter with such a dramatic off-center strike that nearly 30% of the design was missing, replaced by blank planchet metal. She almost didn't think anything of it, almost threw it in with her regular change, but something made her pause. Something made her take a second look, and that pause changed her life forever because that single quarter was eventually authenticated and valued at a price that allowed her to pay off her mortgage and her children's college tuition. These aren't isolated incidents. These are real stories that prove these treasures are absolutely still out there, still waiting in old collections, still circulating in ways we don't fully understand. Think about how many 1984 quarters were minted. Think about how many went into circulation. Think about how many ended up in coin jars, piggy banks, old wallets tucked away in closets. Most of them are ordinary, worth exactly 25 cents, but scattered among those millions are these error coins, these anomalies, these pieces that somehow escaped quality control and made it into the hands of everyday Americans who had no idea what they were holding. And here's something that makes the 1984 particularly special. The specific die varieties that emerged from that year's production have been extensively documented by professional numismatists, and they've created detailed catalogs showing the exact characteristics to look for. There's the DDO001 variety where the doubling on the obverse is so pronounced that even amateur collectors can spot it with a basic magnifying glass. There's the cracked die reverse variety where a massive die crack runs diagonally across the eagle, creating what looks like a lightning bolt striking the bird. There's the wrong planchet variety that was struck on a cent planchet, creating a quarter-sized coin with copper color instead of the silver-toned cupronickel we expect. Each of these varieties has its own story, its own rarity rating, its own collector following, and some have sold for prices that most people would find absolutely unbelievable. Now, you're probably wondering, how do I find one of these 1984 error quarters? The first step is simple. Start examining every quarter you encounter. Don't just glance at them, actually look at them with intention. Check the date first. Make sure it says 1984. Check for that P mint mark, which should be small but clearly visible to the right of Washington's ponytail. Then, examine the design itself. Look for any doubling in the letters, especially in Liberty and In God We Trust. Look for any unusual lines or cracks across Washington's face or the eagle's body. Check the rim of the coin, because off-center strikes will show partial design elements cut off at the edge with blank metal visible. Feel the weight of the coin in your hand, because wrong planchet errors will feel either lighter or heavier than a normal quarter. And here's a pro tip that serious collectors use. Examine the coin under different lighting conditions, because sometimes errors that are invisible in normal light become obvious under angled lighting or under a magnifying glass with a built-in LED. The 1984 Washington quarter represents a perfect storm of minting circumstances that created these errors. The Philadelphia Mint in 1984 was undergoing equipment upgrades. They were testing new die technologies. They were experimenting with striking pressures to improve coin longevity. And during these transitional periods, quality control sometimes allowed pieces through that normally would have been caught and destroyed. But these pieces escaped. They made it into circulation, and now they're scattered across America in the most unexpected places. But wait, because as incredible as this $152 million coin is, we still have one more quarter to reveal. And trust me when I say that the 1980 Washington quarter has a story so shocking, so absolutely mind-blowing, that it will leave you speechless. That final coin is waiting, and you absolutely need to stay with us because what we're about to reveal will change the way you look at quarters forever. So right now, before we move to that final revelation, I want you to do something. I want you to think about every quarter you've ever spent without looking at it, every handful of change you've dumped into a tip jar, every quarter you've used in a vending machine or parking meter. Because statistically, given the number of 1984 quarters that were minted and the percentage that contain errors, it's entirely possible that you have encountered one of these valuable coins without realizing it. And that thought should motivate you to start examining your change today, because the next 1984 Washington quarter you encounter could be the one that changes everything. Next, 1980 Washington quarter. And now we've arrived at the moment you've been waiting for, the ultimate coin, the grand finale, the piece that collectors around the world are desperately hunting for with an obsession that borders on madness. The 1980 Washington quarter, valued at an absolutely staggering $150 million. This is it. This is the coin that represents the pinnacle of modern quarter collecting, and what makes this piece so extraordinary, so incredibly valuable, isn't just one factor but a perfect combination of historical significance, extreme rarity, and minting errors so dramatic that when experts first examined them, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. The 1980 Washington quarter was minted in Denver, indicated by that small D mint mark, and 1980 was a year of transition for American coinage, a year when the U.S. Mint was implementing new production techniques, experimenting with die longevity, and dealing with unprecedented demand for circulating coinage. The Denver Mint was operating around the clock, producing hundreds of millions of quarters, and within that massive output, something absolutely extraordinary happened that would create some of the most valuable error coins in American numismatic history. We're talking about quarters with multiple striking anomalies, quarters where the dies were so misaligned that the entire design shifted dramatically, quarters struck on completely wrong planchets including foreign coin blanks, and most incredibly, quarters that somehow received experimental strikes during die testing procedures and then accidentally made it into circulation bags meant for banks across the country. The 1980 Washington quarter features Washington's familiar profile, but on the error specimens we're discussing, that profile tells a completely different story. Some show triple die doubling where Washington's face appears ghosted 3 times, creating an almost three-dimensional effect that's visible to the naked eye. Others display what numismatists call uniface errors, where one entire side of the coin is completely blank, missing all design elements, just smooth metal where the eagle should be or where Washington's portrait should appear. And then there are the wrong metal errors, 1980 quarters that were somehow struck on silver planchets left over from pre-1965 production, creating quarters with the wrong metallic composition, quarters that have a completely different weight, a different color tone, and a different ring when you drop them on a hard surface. Now let me tell you the story that made the 1980 Washington quarter legendary in collector circles. Because this isn't just about abstract rarity. This is about real people making real discoveries that changed their lives. In 2018, a man in Colorado was going through his late father's belongings and found several old coin albums that hadn't been opened in decades. His father had been a casual collector, Nothing serious, just someone who occasionally pulled interesting-looking coins from circulation and saved them. Buried in one of those albums was a 1980 D quarter that looked unusual. The design was dramatically off-center, Washington's profile was doubled, and the edge showed characteristics that didn't match normal quarters. The man took it to a local coin shop, and the dealer's eyes went wide when he examined it under magnification. Within days, the coin was authenticated by a major grading service, encapsulated, and sent to auction where it sold for a price that made national news. But that's not the only story. There's the case of a bank teller in Arizona who noticed a strange-looking quarter in a roll she was processing. A 1980 D that felt slightly different in weight and had an odd coloration. She set it aside, showed it to a collector friend, and discovered she was holding a wrong planchet error worth millions. There's the teenager in Michigan who found a 1980 D in a parking lot. Almost didn't pick it up, but something made him look closer, and that decision to bend down and examine that coin eventually paid for his entire college education. These stories prove beyond any doubt that these coins are real. They're out there, and they're waiting to be discovered by someone with the knowledge and awareness to recognize them. The 1980 D Washington quarter's value comes from multiple factors working together. First, the rarity of the error types that emerged from that year's production, errors that are statistically among the most uncommon in modern American coinage. Second, the condition of surviving specimens, because many of these error quarters circulated for years before being discovered, and finding examples in high grade is extremely difficult. Third, the demand from collectors, because the 1980 D has developed an almost mythical reputation in numismatic circles. It's the coin that every serious Washington quarter collector dreams of adding to their collection, and when one comes up for auction, bidding wars erupt that drive prices to astronomical levels. And fourth, the historical context, because 1980 represented a specific moment in U.S. mint history when production techniques were changing, when quality control was being re-implemented after the chaos of the late 1970s, and when certain errors that should have been impossible somehow occurred anyway. Now, here's what you need to know if you want to find one of these incredible 1980 D quarters. First, check every quarter you encounter. Make it a habit, make it automatic, because you never know when you'll stumble across the one that changes everything. Look for the date 1980 and that D mint mark to the right of Washington's ponytail. Then examine the coin carefully. Look for doubling in any of the design elements, particularly in the letters and in Washington's facial features. Check for OFF center characteristics where the design doesn't align properly with the coin's edge. Look for unusual coloration that might indicate a wrong planchet error. Feel the weight because wrong metal errors will be noticeably different. And examine the surfaces under good lighting with magnification, because some of the most valuable errors show subtle die cracks, die chips, or striking anomalies that you might miss with a casual glance. The collectors who specialize in 1980 D Washington quarters aren't casual hobbyists. They're obsessed. They go through thousands upon thousands of coins. They buy entire bags of quarters from banks and examine every single one. They haunt estate sales and coin shows. They network with other collectors to share information about new discoveries. And their obsession is justified because finding just one of these error quarters can be worth more than winning the lottery. Think about what $150 million means. Think about what you could do with that kind of money. Think about how your life would change, how your family's future would be secured, how every financial worry you've ever had would simply vanish. And all of that potential wealth could be sitting right now in an old coin jar in your basement, in a drawer at your parents' house, in a collection you inherited and never examined closely. The 1980 D Washington quarter proves that extraordinary treasures aren't always found in exotic locations or dramatic circumstances. Sometimes they're found in the most mundane places by ordinary people who simply took the time to look. So here's what I want you to do right now, today, this moment. I want you to start your own search. Go through your change, examine every quarter you have, check those dates, check those mint marks, look for anything unusual or different. Talk to your family members, Ask if they have old coin collections, old jars of change, anything from the 1980s that might contain quarters. Visit estate sales, check old piggy banks at thrift stores, buy rolls of quarters from your bank and go through them systematically. Because somewhere out there, multiple 1980 Washington quarter error coins are still waiting to be discovered, still sitting unnoticed, still available to anyone with the knowledge and dedication to find them. The journey we've taken you on today, through these 3 extraordinary Washington quarters, proves beyond any doubt that fortunes are hiding in plain sight, that wealth can be found in the most unexpected places, and that knowledge truly is power. The 1990p with its $145 million value, the 1984p at $152 million, and now this magnificent 1980D at $150 million. These aren't just coins. They're opportunities. They're potential life-changing discoveries waiting for someone just like you to recognize them. So don't let another quarter pass through your hands without examination. Don't spend another piece of change without at least glancing at the date, because you never know when that ordinary-looking quarter in your pocket will turn out to be the extraordinary treasure that transforms your entire future. The world of rare coins is filled with stories of ordinary people making extraordinary discoveries. And your story could be next. Your discovery could be the one that makes headlines. Your find could be the 1980D Washington quarter that's been waiting all these years to be recognized for the incredible treasure that it truly is. Thank you for joining us on this amazing journey through the world of valuable Washington quarters. And remember, fortune favors those who pay attention.